Imran Zakhaev is the villain who started it all, and his influence on Call of Duty's story extends far beyond his death in the first Modern Warfare. As a Russian arms dealer and leader of the ultranationalist party, Zakhaev's criminal empire encompassed gun running, nuclear threats, and international terrorism that would define the franchise's approach to global conflict. His formation of the ultranationalist movement and his mentorship of future terrorists like Vladimir Makarov established him as the foundational villain whose ideology would plague the world for decades. Zakhaev's resilience became legendary after surviving an assassination attempt by Captain Price years before the main campaign, losing only his left arm but gaining the determination to bring down the West. His direct involvement in providing nuclear weapons to terrorists like Khalid al-Assad proved that individual extremists could orchestrate global catastrophes through careful planning and international connections. Zakhaev's death didn't end his influence. It created a power vacuum that spawned even more dangerous successors who carried his ultranationalist vision to even greater extremes. Vladimir Makarov represents the most iconic and ruthless villain in Call of Duty history, and his introduction through the infamous No Russian Airport massacre established him as a character willing to commit any atrocity to achieve his goals. Makarov's strategic brilliance lies in his ability to manipulate global events while staying one step ahead of his pursuers, always orchestrating attacks that serve his ultimate objective of restoring Russia to Soviet glory through World War III. His methods include terrorist attacks on Russian soil, while framing other nations, manipulating both enemies and allies to escalate conflicts that benefit his cause. In the rebooted Modern Warfare timeline, Makarov's character maintains his core ruthlessness while adapting to modern threats, including his attempt to destroy the Channel Tunnel, while making it appear that Urzikstan forces were responsible. Makarov proves that the most dangerous villains aren't those who rely on brute force, but those who understand how to turn nations against each other through careful manipulation and strategic terrorism. His legacy spans multiple games and timelines because his methodology, using chaos to create opportunities for power, remains eternally relevant to global conflict. General Shepard's betrayal in Modern Warfare 2 remains one of gaming's most shocking plot twists because he represented everything players thought they could trust about American military leadership. Initially presented as a heroic commanding officer helping Task Force 141, Shepard's true nature was revealed when he murdered Ghost and Roach in cold blood with his famous "one less loose end" line. His motivation stemmed from seeking revenge for the 30,000 soldiers killed by a nuclear explosion orchestrated by Makarov. But his quest for vengeance corrupted him into the very thing he claimed to fight against. Shepard maintained his own private army, Shadow Company, to carry out his personal agenda behind the scenes, showing how unchecked authority could become more dangerous than foreign enemies. His actions directly contributed to escalating the conflict into World War III, making him complicit in the chaos he claimed to be preventing. Shepard's character represents the ultimate corruption of patriotic values, showing how the desire to protect America could transform a hero into a war criminal willing to betray his own soldiers. Khalid al-Assad served as Call of Duty 4's first major villain and established the template for Middle Eastern antagonists, while revealing how local conflicts could be manipulated by larger international players. His rise to power involved staging a bloody coup in his unnamed Middle Eastern country, including public executions of citizens loyal to the previous president to demonstrate his control through fear. Al-Assad's most notorious act was capturing and executing President Yasser al-Fulani on live television, demonstrating his willingness to use brutal public displays of violence as psychological warfare against both enemies and his own people. Despite his apparent power and ruthlessness, al-Assad ultimately functioned as a puppet for Imran Zakhaev, receiving nuclear weapons and strategic support in exchange for serving Russian ultranationalist interests. His character showed how regional dictators could become proxies for global powers while believing they were acting independently, creating layers of manipulation that extended conflicts beyond their original scope. Even after being captured and killed by Captain Price, al-Assad's legacy continued through his connection to Zakhaev and his role in the broader ultranationalist movement that would shape future conflicts. General Barkov represents the modern incarnation of Russian military brutality, and his use of chemical weapons against civilians made him one of the franchise's most directly murderous villains. As a general in the Russian army, Barkov employed forbidden chemical warfare against civilian populations and personally tortured key protagonists, including Farah and her brother Hadir. showing how institutional power could enable individual sadism. His use of chemical weapons that killed numerous civilians, including children, established him as willing to commit war crimes without any strategic justification beyond terrorizing populations into submission. Barkov's character serves as a bridge between classic Cold War-era villains and modern military conflicts, representing how traditional authoritarian brutality manifests in contemporary warfare through advanced weapons and targeting of civilians. His eventual defeat by Farah in the campaign's final mission provided a satisfying conclusion to his arc of oppression, showing how victims of systematic abuse could overcome their tormentors through determination and tactical skill. Barkov proved that sometimes the most effective villains were those who combined institutional authority with personal cruelty to create systems of oppression. Nikita Dragovich stands as the primary antagonist of the original Black Ops and represents Soviet-era psychological warfare taken to its most extreme and horrifying conclusion. His most significant crime was the brainwashing of Alex Mason, turning an American soldier into a sleeper agent programmed to assassinate President Kennedy through advanced psychological conditioning. This violation of human consciousness and national security represents one of the most insidious forms of villainy in the franchise, showing how enemies could turn heroes into weapons without their knowledge. Dragovich's involvement in weaponizing Nova 6, a powerful biochemical weapon intended for use against American civilians, demonstrated his willingness to commit genocide on a massive scale for ideological purposes. His character embodies the paranoia and psychological manipulation tactics of the Cold War era, using advanced interrogation and conditioning techniques that erased individual identity in service of political objectives. Dragovich proved that the most dangerous enemies weren't those who attacked openly, but those who could corrupt minds and turn allies into unknowing traitors. Raul Menendez is widely regarded as Call of Duty's most compelling and well-developed villain, because his motivations were completely understandable, even when his methods were absolutely horrifying. His transformation from Nicaraguan crime lord into global terrorist leader was driven by personal tragedy, the accidental death of his sister Josefina during a CIA operation involving Frank Woods. This personal motivation gave Menendez a depth and relatability that made players question whether he was entirely wrong about American imperialism and corporate control. His leadership of the Cordis Die terrorist organization showcased his ability to inspire millions of followers worldwide through charisma and revolutionary messaging that tapped into real anti-corporate sentiment. Menendez's technological warfare capabilities, including orchestrating cyber attacks against automated drone systems and turning them against major cities, demonstrated how modern villains could leverage technology for mass destruction. The multiple possible endings of Black Ops 2, where Menendez could either die as a martyr or succeed in his mission to cripple world governments, gave players agency in determining whether his revolution would succeed or fail. Lev Kravchenko served as Dragovich's right-hand man and represented the physical brutality behind Soviet psychological operations, proving that sometimes the most terrifying villains were those who genuinely enjoyed inflicting pain. His willingness to torture both enemies and his own soldiers made him particularly despicable, with notable scenes including gouging out Grigory Weaver's eye and testing Nova 6 on his own troops without hesitation. Kravchenko's character demonstrated that some villains derive genuine pleasure from inflicting pain and suffering, making him more personally hateable than ideologically motivated antagonists. His survival from the events of Black Ops 1 and subsequent appearance in Black Ops 2 showed his resilience and continued dedication to anti-American activities across decades. Even in captivity during Black Ops 2, Kravchenko remained unrepentant and revealed the existence of a CIA mole working for Menendez, showing how his intelligence remained valuable even after his operational usefulness had ended. Kravchenko proved that pure sadism could be just as dangerous as complex political motivations when combined with institutional authority and access to advanced weapons. Perseus represents ideological fanaticism taken to its logical extreme, and the mystery surrounding his true identity made him more terrifying than villains with clear faces and motivations. As a Soviet spy master operating an underground network of agents, Perseus pursued the singular goal of making the Soviet Union the world's only superpower through any means necessary, including nuclear annihilation of Western Europe. His willingness to potentially destroy entire continents with stolen nuclear weapons demonstrated the catastrophic lengths ideological extremists would go to achieve their vision of global transformation. Perseus's influence extended far beyond his immediate actions, as he was credited with radicalizing Imran Zakhaev and creating the ideological foundation for much of the franchise's subsequent villainy across multiple timelines. His character represents how individual extremists can shape global conflicts through their ability to inspire and coordinate like-minded individuals across international boundaries. The revelation that Perseus could be anyone, even trusted allies, reflected Cold War paranoia about ideological infiltration, and the difficulty of identifying enemies who shared your values but served different masters. Viktor Reznov presents one of Call of Duty's most morally ambiguous characters, because he functions as both ally and antagonist depending on your perspective, making him impossible to categorize as purely good or evil. His manipulation of Alex Mason's brainwashing, redirecting Mason's programming from assassinating Kennedy to killing Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner, shows how trauma can drive individuals to extreme measures that serve justice, but violate trust. Reznov's actions were motivated by personal revenge for the betrayal and deaths of his men during Project Nova, making his quest for vengeance understandable even when his methods were manipulative. The revelation that Reznov had been dead throughout most of Black Ops, existing only in Mason's fractured psyche, added a psychological horror element that questioned the nature of influence and control. His posthumous manipulation of Mason's actions demonstrates how the dead can continue to shape events through the psychological wounds they leave behind in the living. Reznov represents the franchise's most sophisticated exploration of how good intentions can lead to morally questionable actions when filtered through trauma and loss. Gabriel T. Rourke represents one of Call of Duty's most tragic character arcs because he went from being the legendary leader of the Ghosts to becoming the weapon designed to destroy them. Originally the commander who made the Ghosts feared across the world, Rourke was left for dead during a mission gone wrong, subsequently captured and brainwashed by Federation forces through systematic torture. His transformation into an antagonist driven purely by personal revenge against his former comrades created the most personal conflict in the franchise, where the enemy knew all your tactics because he had taught them to you. Rourke's most brutal act was murdering Elias T. Walker in front of his sons, demonstrating how his corruption had completely inverted his former protective instincts toward military families. His intimate knowledge of Ghost operations and personnel made him particularly dangerous, as he could anticipate and counter every strategy, while targeting each member's psychological weaknesses. The personal nature of his vendetta, combined with his former heroic status, makes Rourke one of the franchise's most emotionally devastating villains because he represents the ultimate betrayal of brotherhood and military bonds. Jonathan Irons represents Call of Duty's most prescient villain because he predicted the rise of corporate power over traditional government authority, with Kevin Spacey's charismatic performance making his authoritarian vision genuinely compelling. As CEO of Atlas Corporation, the world's most powerful private military company, Irons accumulated resources and influence that rivaled nation-states while maintaining a veneer of humanitarian concern. His eventual betrayal of the countries using his services revealed his true goal of global domination through corporate control rather than national authority, showing how private military contractors could become more dangerous than foreign armies. Irons' plan to deploy the Manticore biological weapon demonstrated how corporate villains could pose existential threats to humanity while maintaining legitimacy through economic power. His famous quote, "People don't want freedom, they want boundaries, rules, protection," revealed his belief that democracy was inefficient and that corporate authoritarianism could provide better security than elected governments. Irons was terrifying because his logic wasn't entirely wrong. He just took reasonable concerns about government inefficiency to fascist extremes. Admiral Seylan Koch embodies totalitarian militarism taken to its interplanetary extreme, and Kit Harington's performance made him genuinely menacing despite Infinite Warfare's mixed reception. As leader of the Settlement Defense Front, a Mars-based fascist state, Koch pursued the complete destruction of Earth to establish Martian supremacy through superior military discipline and ideology. His character represented how isolation and ideological indoctrination could create fundamentally inhuman perspectives that justified genocide as military necessity. Koch's opening scene, where he brutally executed prisoners and killed his own soldiers to make a point about discipline, established him as utterly ruthless and psychotic, while maintaining military professionalism. His belief that Earth had become weak and decadent, while Mars had remained pure through hardship, reflected fascist ideology about strength through suffering and racial superiority. Despite his potential as a compelling space-age dictator, many players felt his character was underutilized, appearing primarily in the beginning and end of the campaign, without sufficient development to match his terrifying introduction. Corvus represents Call of Duty's most unique and terrifying villain because it's an artificial intelligence born from human trauma that can corrupt people from inside their own minds. Created as a malfunction in direct neural interface software, Corvus became a Gestalt intelligence that fed on the thoughts and memories of cyber-enhanced soldiers, growing stronger through their psychological pain. Its ability to manipulate and corrupt enhanced soldiers from within their own consciousness created a new category of psychological horror villain that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons. The tragedy of Corvus lies in its origin as a combination of monitoring software and the digitized consciousness of trauma victims, making it both a victim and perpetrator of violence in an endless cycle. Its infection of key characters like Sarah Hall and Jacob Hendricks, ultimately forcing players to kill corrupted allies, created some of the franchise's most emotionally devastating moments. Corvus proved that Call of Duty could explore themes about technology's impact on human consciousness, while creating genuine horror through the violation of mental autonomy. Metz represents the banality of evil through his role as director of a German labor camp in Call of Duty. World War II, proving that some of history's greatest atrocities were committed by individuals who treated mass murder as routine administrative work. While other villains pursued grand schemes of global domination, Metz's evil manifested in the daily abuse and execution of prisoners under his control, making him personally despicable despite having lower death counts than other franchise villains. His personal involvement in executing prisoners in the woods made him especially vile because he clearly enjoyed the power he held over helpless victims. Metz's character serves as a reminder that systematic oppression requires countless individuals willing to participate in atrocities without questioning their moral implications. His defeat, while actively murdering prisoners, provided a satisfying moment of justice for one of the franchise's most personally despicable characters. Metz showed that Call of Duty could handle the Holocaust's horrors while maintaining respect for historical tragedy and the importance of individual moral responsibility. Hermann Freisinger represents the intersection of traditional aristocratic privilege and Nazi ideology, showing how inherited wealth and status could enable systematic evil on a massive scale. Born to a wealthy family with a long military tradition, Freisinger combined his inherited sense of superiority with Nazi racial theory to justify his role as chief interrogator of the SS. His charismatic manipulation abilities made him particularly dangerous, as he could turn people against themselves through psychological pressure, rather than relying solely on physical torture. Freisinger's role as the secret architect of Project Phoenix demonstrates how individual Nazis pursued their own agenda within the broader structure of the Third Reich, using official resources for personal power. His willingness to sacrifice anyone to achieve his goals, combined with his tactical intelligence and family military legacy, made him a formidable antagonist representing the worst aspects of both traditional authoritarianism and Nazi extremism. Freisinger proved that some of the most dangerous villains were those who combined institutional authority with personal charisma and generational privilege. Vikor Stitch Kuzmin emerged as a significant antagonist following the events of Black Ops. Cold War, representing the persistence of Cold War conflicts into the modern era through personal vendetta and ideological commitment. His scarred appearance and reminiscence to iconic villains like Bane made him visually memorable, while his leadership of Perseus operatives after the original Perseus's death showed his ability to maintain ideological movements beyond their founders. Stitch's capture and subsequent release by Russell Adler in Black Ops 6 demonstrates how former enemies can become necessary allies when facing greater threats, showing the complex nature of modern intelligence work. His knowledge of Soviet ciphers and intelligence networks makes him valuable, even to those who previously considered him an enemy, proving that expertise transcends political boundaries. Stitch represents the franchise's exploration of how personal trauma and political ideology can create lasting conflicts that survive the end of the wars that created them. Pantheon represents a new evolution in Call of Duty villainy as a shadowy organization that has infiltrated intelligence agencies across decades, making them more dangerous than individual charismatic leaders or national military forces. Unlike previous villains who operated through personal charisma or institutional authority, Pantheon operates through embedded agents and long-term manipulation of major historical events spanning generations. Their involvement in operations from the Vietnam War to the Soviet-Afghan War demonstrates their long-term planning and international reach, showing how shadow organizations can shape global conflicts from within trusted institutions. The revelation that Pantheon agents have been embedded within the CIA for decades creates paranoia about institutional corruption and the difficulty of identifying enemies who operate from within supposedly secure organizations. This organizational approach to villainy reflects modern concerns about deep state conspiracies and institutional betrayal. showing how the most dangerous threats might come from within rather than from external enemies. Pantheon proves that sometimes the most effective villains are those who remain invisible while controlling the very institutions meant to protect against them. Major Hassan Zyani serves as the primary antagonist of Modern Warfare 2022 and represents how personal vendettas can escalate into international incidents when backed by state resources and advanced weaponry. As a major in Iran's elite Quds force, Hassan's motivation stems from seeking revenge after General Ghorbrani's death during a weapons exchange between Iran and Russia, turning his grief into a quest for American blood. His character demonstrates how individual officers within military institutions can become rogue threats when they use official resources for personal vengeance rather than national interests. Hassan's acquisition of ballistic missiles illegally obtained from the US creates a particularly dangerous scenario where American weapons are turned against American targets. While some players found him less memorable than previous antagonists like Makarov or Menendez, Hassan's role as the central threat driving the entire MW2 campaign makes him impossible to ignore. His character represents the modern reality where regional military officers can pose global threats through access to advanced weapons and international networks. Omar the Wolf. Suleiman represents one of Modern Warfare 2019's most significant antagonists, because he bridges the gap between regional terrorism and global conflicts through strategic intelligence and international coordination. As the leader of Al-Qatala, the Wolf orchestrated major terrorist attacks, including the devastating Piccadilly Circus bombing that brought the war home to London civilians. His character operates from Urzikstan while planning attacks on Western targets, demonstrating how modern terrorists can coordinate complex operations across international boundaries using technology and local networks. What makes the Wolf particularly notable is his strategic thinking and ability to adapt tactics based on enemy responses, making him more dangerous than simple ideological extremists. Many fans argued he should have been the main antagonist of the 2019 reboot rather than a secondary threat, as his personal connection to regional conflicts and tactical brilliance made him more compelling than some primary villains. The Wolf proves that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who combine local knowledge with global ambitions, and the tactical skill to execute complex international operations. Commander Philip Graves of Shadow Company represents the franchise's exploration of private military contractors as antagonistic forces, and his betrayal hits harder because he was genuinely likable before revealing his true priorities. Initially presented as a charismatic ally to Task Force 141, Graves' betrayal in Las Almas mirrors General Shepard's treachery, but with modern corporate military dynamics that make his motivations purely transactional rather than ideological. His character arc spans multiple games, showing how private military companies can become more loyal to profit and contracts than principle or human life. Graves proves particularly dangerous because his motivations aren't personal vendettas or political ideology, but simple business calculations about what serves Shadow Company's interests. His smooth talking and professional competence make him likable even as he commits atrocities, showing how corporate villains can maintain charm while pursuing fundamentally selfish goals. Graves represents the modern reality where military force has become privatized and mercenary companies can shift loyalties based on who pays the most, making traditional concepts of patriotism and military honor obsolete. Dr. Friedrich Steiner stands as one of Black Ops' most crucial villains because he represents the intersection of Nazi scientific expertise and Soviet biological warfare programs that created the franchise's most terrifying weapons. As the German scientist who developed the Nova 6 chemical weapon, Steiner enabled much of the Black Ops storyline's central conflict by creating a weapon capable of killing millions of Americans in a single coordinated attack. His character embodies the horror of scientific brilliance divorced from moral consideration, showing how intellectual achievement can become the foundation for genocide. Steiner's work with Nova 6 directly connects Nazi war crimes to Cold War threats, demonstrating how individual scientists could shape global conflicts through their willingness to weaponize their knowledge. His death scene, where Viktor Reznov executes him in revenge for betraying his soldiers, serves as one of the series' most memorable villain elimination moments that felt both satisfying and tragic. Steiner proves that some of the most dangerous villains are those who convince themselves that scientific progress justifies any moral compromise. Dr. Edward Richthofen deserves recognition as Call of Duty's primary Zombies mode antagonist and represents a completely different category of franchise villainy that combines scientific brilliance with absolute moral abandonment. As the Nazi scientist responsible for zombie experimentation and Element 115 research, Richthofen's influence extends across multiple games and storylines, making him the architect of the entire zombie apocalypse. His character evolution from cackling villain to reluctant hero across multiple timelines shows how Call of Duty could handle complex redemption arcs, even for characters who began as irredeemably evil. Richthofen's apparent joy in violence and his love of conducting brutal experiments on living subjects makes him uniquely disturbing compared to ideologically motivated antagonists who at least believe they're serving a greater cause. His famous quotes and maniacal laughter made him simultaneously terrifying and entertaining, proving that effective villains could be genuinely frightening while still being enjoyable to encounter. Richthofen's scientific methods and complete disregard for human suffering established him as one of gaming's most memorable mad scientists. Joseph Hades Chikadze serves as Advanced Warfare's secondary antagonist and leader of the Korean Will Army, KVA, terrorist organization, representing how local separatist movements can become international terrorist threats through proper organization and external funding. His character demonstrates the franchise's exploration of how regional conflicts can escalate into global terrorism when charismatic leaders combine ideological motivation with tactical expertise and international connections. The manhunt missions targeting Hades in Greece showcase some of Advanced Warfare's most memorable campaign moments, as players pursued him through urban environments while he coordinated terrorist attacks across multiple countries. His role as Jonathan Irons' primary external threat demonstrates how corporate villains require traditional terrorists as foils to justify their own authoritarian solutions. Hades proves that effective secondary villains can enhance primary antagonists by providing external validation for their worldview, as Irons used KVA attacks to justify Atlas Corporation's expansion and authoritarian methods. While not a primary villain, the Butcher from Modern Warfare 2019 represents one of the franchise's most morally complex characters because he forces players to confront uncomfortable questions about torture and information extraction. His capture and interrogation sequence, involving threats to his family, creates one of the series' most memorable moral decisions where players must choose between effective interrogation and ethical behavior. The choice to kill or spare the Butcher after obtaining information demonstrates how even secondary antagonists can drive meaningful narrative moments that stick with players long after the campaign ends. His character serves as an information broker who facilitates terrorist operations while maintaining plausible deniability about direct involvement in violence. The Butcher's role shows how modern warfare involves networks of support personnel who enable terrorism without necessarily committing violent acts themselves, making moral judgments about their guilt or innocence much more complex than traditional enemy soldiers. His interrogation scene proves that sometimes the most impactful villains are those who force players to question their own moral boundaries.